Welcome to The Complete Works. I'm your host, Doug Hess. If you're tuning in to Complete Works for the first time, welcome. We welcome you. If you're coming back and have listened to past episodes, welcome back to The Complete Works. What we do here on The Complete Works, we can discuss a specific movie of a film actor, actress, director, or composer, and we really break down each episode one film at a time, and we're looking at their complete film history, or hence the name of the podcast, The Complete Works. Currently, we're working our way through the Nicolas Cage film career, and in this episode of The Complete Works, we're going to be discussing the movie Dog Eat Dog. It was a 2016 release, obviously starring Nicolas Cage, and Willem Dafoe was in that as well. We'll get in a little bit of history between Willem Dafoe and Nicolas Cage in just a few minutes. For more information of the Complete Works podcast, you can go to film-book.com, and by searching the term The Complete Works, you can also reach us by email by using podcast at film-book.com. Again, that is podcast at film-book.com. You can put The Complete Works in the subject line, or you can put episode 77 or Dog Eat Dog, and we'd love to hear your feedback regarding not only this episode, but all of our episodes that we do here at The Complete Works. If you like what you hear on this podcast, please hit the subscription button, I should say. Not submit, but subscription. And that way, every time we have a podcast every week, you can have it directly sent to you every week. And so you get the latest and greatest editions of our podcast. Again, this week we're going through the Nicolas Cage film history. We're on episode 77, or film 77 of the Nicolas Cage history, if you will. And this week, again, we are talking about the movie Dog Eat Dog. And in terms of that, like we like to do every week, before we really dive into the specifics of the movie, everybody that's starring in it, and the plot, and my take on the movie, I'd like to share with you a little bit of trivia, some history regarding this movie, Dog Eat Dog, starring Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage paid $100,000 of his salary to Willem Dafoe in order to pursue him to make this movie. So Nicolas Cage had to give up about $100,000 of his salary in order for Willem Dafoe to be able to sign it and come on this movie of Dog Eat Dog. Now, the director, Paul Schrader, is said to have approached several different actors that he wanted to have as Greco the Greek, not the Great, but Greco the Greek in this movie. Michael Douglas was one of them. Martin Scorsese, Nick Nolte, Christopher Walken, Jeff Goldblum were some of those that were approached by Paul Schrader in order to play Greco the Greek, but it didn't work out with any of them. And so in the end, to avoid going over the budget, Paul Schrader decided to play the role himself, which was in fact his first debut in a film. Now, Paul Schrader would also go on to direct the film, and we'll have some stories about some of the past involvements that he's had in some of the films. But know that not only was Paul Schrader in the movie, he also directed it as well. What's interesting is that this is the seventh collaboration between Paul and Willem Dafoe. They have been in 7 other movies together. This particular film, Dog Eat Dog, was shot in only 25 days, and the filming crew was largely comprised of recent film school graduates. Typically, a shoot when it comes to a movie is longer than 25 days. In terms of this, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I'm not going to do it. I will save the comments of what I thought of the movie here later. Paul Schrader and Nicolas Cage, this is their third collaboration. The other two would be Bringing Out the Dead which was back in 1999, and then Dying of the Lights back in 2014. So 2 years previous to this movie being released. The director, Paul Schrader, he had final cut, he had final control over this movie, which was not necessarily some of the things that he had in previous movies. There was a long history of movies. Matter of fact, Dying of the Lights back in 2014, also starring Nicolas Cage. Paul went to his Facebook post, which he described that the studio and the money men that were funding the films were going way too far, and that he openly protested the release of the 2014 movie, The Dying of the Lights, which, like I said, he went out on his Facebook page and he quoted was of saying this film was taken away from me. It was re-edited, scored, and mixed without my input. This would not be Paul's first rodeo with a situation like that. He had some other screenwriting credits, a couple movies that you might have heard of, Taxi Driver and The Last Temptation of Christ. Now, the reason I bring up The Last Temptation of Christ, you might remember back in the 80s, that was a big controversial movie. So a lot of churches protested that movie. Interesting enough, Willem Dafoe was in that movie. I believe he played Christ in the movie. And then Francis Ford Coppola was the director of that movie. And why that is interesting is because that is Nicolas Cage's uncle. Nicolas Cage is the nephew to Francis Ford Coppola. So kind of a neat tie-in there in terms of that. So in the past, I know that Paul Schrader basically had some run-ins with the studios and money men, and in this particular film, he had final cuts in this. This is the second time Willem Dafoe had appeared in the film based on an Edward Bunker movie. Now, Edward Bunker, this movie, Dog Eat Dog, is loosely based off a book by the same title, which was by Edward Bunker. It was a 1995 novel. Like I said, it was by the same name. It's roughly 240 pages in length. Mr. Bunker is no longer with us. He has since passed away. Full disclosure, I have to tell you that I have not read the book, but I did have a chance to go out there and look at some of the reviews, not only from critics, but also from everyday readers. You can go out there and do all kinds of different searches. And one thing that I found to be very common in a lot of the comments or the reviews of this particular book, Dog Eat Dog, was that Edward Bunker was a convicted convict himself, and he had basically written about his time in prison. He had written several other books. A lot of people said this was actually his best work, Dog Eat Dog book. I believe he had a total of 4 books that he had written, and basically a lot of people that I had was looking at the reviews said that they were not actually interested in the book themselves, but they had a loved one, a brother, a family member that was incarcerated, and so they had requested that book. And several individuals had went out and said that that they thought that it was a very, very popular book within the prison system, and that Mr. Bunker really wrote from experience. And several people also made the comment that he was really writing about himself when he wrote Dog Eat Dog. And each of the characters, there's 3 main characters in this movie that we'll get to in just a minute. There was a little bit of them in each of the 3 characters. So I thought that was really interesting. But again, in full disclosure, I have not read the book. It's a 240-page novel by, again, Edward Bunker that was written and released in 1995. And then in 2016, the movie was made and released. The other movie that Willem Dafoe was in He had previously appeared in Animal Factory back in 2000, and that again is another book written by Edward Bunker in terms of that. And now Nicolas Cage and Willem Dafoe previously co-starred together in Wild at Heart back in 1990. Additionally, Dafoe starred in Shadow of the Vampire, in 2000, which was co-produced by Nicolas Cage. In terms of that. And then one last other bit of trivia that I thought was kind of interesting is Willem Dafoe played Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, in Spider-Man back in 2002, and Nicolas Cage was originally considered for the role before Dafoe was finally selected for that. So some interesting tidbits on this movie. Now, the movie is only 93 minutes in length, which is about an hour and 33 minutes or an hour and a half in terms of that. And so it's not a very long movie, so like I said, about an hour and a half. Let me get to some of the cast that play in this. And let me also give you a quick plot before we really dive into things, is that the plot is basically 3 former prisoners, Troy, which is Nicolas Cage, Mad Dog, which is Willem Dafoe, and Diesel, which is played by Christopher Matthew Cook, are hired to kidnap a baby and share a big ransom payoff. Now, this movie, and again, I don't want to get too deep into it just quite yet, but it's set in Cleveland, and it was with the Mafia. So we'll get into that in just a second. So Nicolas Cage plays Troy. Willem Dafoe plays Mad Dog. Christopher Matthew Cook is Diesel. Omar Dorsey is Moon Man. Paul Schrader, as I mentioned, the director is Greco the Greek. In terms of that. So several other individuals that are in the movie as well, but those are really the main characters that I wanted to point out to you in terms of this. Okay, so it was, like I said, it's 93 minutes in length. Let me just kind of give you a quick overview of the movie. It is a crew of ex-cons that are hired by the Cleveland Mafia to kidnap the baby of a rival mobster. Okay, so you have 2 mob families, and one family, the Cleveland mob, goes to these 3 ex-cons, Troy, Mad Dog, and Diesel, and asks them to kidnap the rival mobster's baby. Okay? Crave for a lifetime of experience that runs the gamut from incarceration to liberation. Dog eat dog. So, one of the other things that I found out in the review, and then obviously watching the movie, is that but obviously, like anything else, the book goes in a lot more detail. It's 240 pages compared to just 90 minutes on the big screen. That basically, the book goes in a lot more detail of basically telling what it's really like to be in prison. So, but again, I don't want to digress too much. Dog Eat Dog is the story of these 3 men who are all out of prison and now have the task of adapting themselves back to a normal life, being back to civilians. They're out of the prison system. They need to get their lives back together in terms of that. Now, the California 3-strike law looms over them, but they think to themselves, what the heck? What are we going to do? They only know one thing, and that's basically a life of crime. And so they're going to do what they do and what they do best in terms of that. Troy, Nicolas Cage's character, he is the kind of the mastermind of the 3, and he seeks uncomplicated, clean life, but can't get away from his hatred for the system. So he wants to go and kind of be normal, whatever normal is, in terms of that. But unfortunately, he's kind of pulled back into the life that he knows, and that is crime. Diesel is on the mob's payroll, and his interest is in the suburban home, and he has a nagging wife that is kind of weighing on him all the time. She's always on his butt for something, and so he too is looking for an escape there. The loose cannon of the trio is the William Dafoe's character Mad Dog, and he is possessed by true demons within, which lead him from one situation to the next. One more hit, one more jackpot, and they all will be satisfied. That's kind of the summary, if you will, of the film. Now, when I talk about Mad Dog really having true demons of his own, again, Mad Dog is played by Willem Dafoe. You kind of get a sense, and I know that we might have some kids, and I want to keep this clean, but William Dafoe's character, Mad Dog, has bloodshot eyes tattooed on the underside of his chin and on the back of his neck. He ends up in the beginning of the film, slicing his girlfriend's neck because she finds his stash of Japanese pornography. He goes on then to kill her daughter while shouting things like, "I didn't hear nothing about no cupcakes." Naturally, all of this is filtered and brought up with very graphic scenes and situations that could make some people kind of a little queasy in terms of that. It kind of reminds me of another film, Natural Born Killers, that was a Oliver Stone movie back in the 90s, and it was one of those very graphic, in-your-face, blood. Woody Harrelson was in that movie, and it just really showed the violence. So when I talk about the true demons and that he's possessed and he just keeps going on, that's kind of how the movie opens, and we are introduced to Mad Dog in terms of that, and he's just kind of a crazy guy in terms of that. So just try to set the example of what that is like. And then you might even ask yourself that, wow, this guy has friends. And yes, that's where, the Nicolas Cage and Christopher Matthew Cook comes in, Diesel and Troy come into the movie. I would classify this movie, Dog Eat Dog. Again, it's a 2006. I would say it's a very dark comedy / action thriller. And you might say comedy because some of the things that you see, you're just like, it's almost stupid comedy. Like I mentioned, when he kills his girlfriend's daughter and he shouts out the line. I had it written down here. I didn't hear nothing about no cupcakes. It's not funny, but it is, because it almost doesn't work to a degree, in my opinion, in terms of that. So, yes, I would say that it's very dark. I think there's portions of a thriller in here, and also portions of a comedy and even action that Schrader portrays in this movie. The screenplay was by Matthew Wilder, and again, told you earlier, it's loosely based on the book by the same name, Dog Eat Dog by Edward Bunker, back in 1995. In terms of that, overall, how would I, depict this movie or even talk about this movie? I had a chance to go out and look at some of the reviews, like Rotten Tomato. I try to give you a review of where Rotten Tomato has this at. He gave it a 50%. It was right there at a 5 out of 10 in terms of that, based on 68 reviews from Rotten Tomato. In my personal opinion, I think it got that high of a score just because it had Nicolas Cage and William Dafoe in it. I would probably personally put it down more of a 3 in my personal opinion, just because I didn't think it worked, to be honest with you. I like Nicolas Cage, and I really like Willem Dafoe. I liked him in Platoon. He was also in American Psycho. Mississippi Burning is another film with Willem Dafoe in it. He's a great actor, but to me, this movie, Dog Eat Dog, didn't work. I regret that I didn't have time, or I haven't taken the time, maybe is the best way of saying it, is to read Dog Eat Dog. I might have had a different opinion of the movie if I had a chance to read the book first. I might have given it a little bit higher. I haven't. I didn't. So again, I would say overall, I would give this film more of a 3 instead of a 5. I did see where some of the critics actually gave this even a lower than a 5. One critic from Slate magazine actually gave it a 1.5 out of 4 stars and commented that the film had a few thrilling moments, but its pleasure are fleeting and always balanced by oppression, ugliness. It really is even deeper dive into the smile between chaos rather than compassion and contentment. So across the board, I would say that most people had it at a 5 or lower, which means that only about 50% actually enjoyed the movie. I'm going to be honest, I was not one that really enjoyed it. Matter of fact, about halfway through the movie, I was looking at my watch saying, how much longer do I have to watch this show? In terms of that, let's just give me an honest review. Again, even though it's got some actors with names in it, I just wanted to get it over with, personally, in terms of that. So, some other information about the film. The film was the closing entry for the director's fortnight section of the 2016 Cannes Film Festival. In terms of that, the principal photography of the film began on October the 19th, 2015 in Cleveland, Ohio. Filming also took place in Sheffield Lake, and it ended on November the 23rd, 2015. And like I said, they only took 25 days to shoot the film, and most of the crew were recent film graduates in terms of that. It was released on November the 4th, 2016 in the United States. Again, on May 20th of 2016, it was at the Cannes Film Festival. In terms of budget, I had did some research on that. It looked like they had a budget of approximately $40 million. But it didn't even make $1 million back at the box office. So it was basically a bust from the start. Like I said, I didn't enjoy the movie. I thought it was at times very painful to watch, even though you've got two great actors in there. You know, Nicolas Cage can be spotty at times, but overall, I think he's a great actor. Willem Dafoe, like I said, 3 or 4 different movies that come to my mind immediately with him in it, and I found him to be just a very good actor as well. But in this particular movie, Dog Eat Dog, it was a flop in my opinion, and really a disappointment, to be honest with you, in terms of that. So, not that it didn't have its great moments at times, but overall, it was just flat for me, and it's actually kind of hard to talk about it, to be honest with you, because I didn't enjoy it that much in terms of that. And 9 times out of 10, I'm going to give the benefit out of the doubt in terms of that. So, sorry for the poor review on terms of that, but I'm just trying to give you my honest opinion and feedback. Again, like I said, I wish I would have taken the time to have read the book first, but I didn't, and that's fine in terms of that. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode of The Complete Works. as we work our way through the Nicolas Cage movie history. This film was Dog Eat Dog. You can find out more of our work on film-book.com. Just search for Doug Hess or the complete works. You can also find me on Twitter at HessDoug14. Again, that's HessDoug at 14. If you're listening to podcasts or on iTunes or another podcast service, please rate us, review, like the episode. And if you're listening to podcasts on your YouTube channel, FilmBook Podcast, please like us on our video. And again, subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment in the comment section. Send us an email. We would love to hear from you. Get your take on this podcast or on others. Again, if you like what you hear, we encourage you to like the podcast. Hit the subscription button so every week we can go ahead and have that signed up to you, or sent to you, I should say. Feel free to email us at podcast@film-book.com. Again, that's podcast@film-book.com. In the subject line, write the complete works, episode 77, Dog Eat Dog, whatever. Get our attention. We'd love to hear from you in terms of that. So we're going to ask you to tune in next time when we review and analyze the next Nicolas Cage film. We thank you for listening. We'll see you then. Take care, everyone. McVeigh for all charges on October the 30th. For all the charges on October the 30th in 2000. So some 60-some years later, 50, 60-some years later, President Clinton exonerates Captain McVeigh in terms of that. And so basically it was that pressure that got to him. And that's how the film really ends, is that Captain McVeigh just really couldn't take the torture, if you will. I hope I can say it that way, from the harassment. And it was just a terrible thing. I mean, I can't imagine being in the captain's position, but I cannot also imagine being one of the loved ones that lost a husband or a father or a brother in this event, or a son. And I could see both sides of this. And like I said, Captain McVeigh just really couldn't take the pressure, and unfortunately commits suicide from the harassment, for lack of a better word, in terms of that. Now, what's interesting, there's always a subplot in films like this. I shouldn't say always, but a lot of times. And basically we have two childhood friends, Indianapolis diver Brian Bam Smithwicks and a crew member, Mike Delanto. Long story short, both of these individuals fall in love with the same woman without the other knowing. So both of them are in love with the same woman. Neither one of them really knows it. D'Anto purchased an engagement ring before the trip, and he is going to propose. Who tells? The trip. Basically, long story short, again, the two of them get into it, a brawl involving two of the crewmen. So D'Anto loses a ring, and one of the other crew members, Alvin, steals it after the ship is destroyed. Smithwick and D'Anto spend the next few days in the sea with the rest of the crew, where D'Anto succumbs to massive leg injuries received in a shark attack, and Smithwick is given the engagement ring by Alvin. Band proposes to Antonio's fiancée Claire to help raise their child, and she accepts their proposal. While the credit rolls, two Navy sailors re-encounter the sharks in the water, and the real rescue footage is shown along with many still shots of the lost sailors in the Pacific Ocean at that day. Just a really terrible situation based on a true story and event. So the question then becomes Nicolas Cage and his performance in the USS Indianapolis. I thought he was okay. I mean, I would say that, like I've said in so many of these, it wasn't his best, but I wouldn't say it was his worst. I would, on a scale 1 to 10, I'm a little bit more down the middle. I would lean towards a 6, maybe even a 6.5 out of a 10 in terms of that. Just because, well, I'm a history buff, and I really love those types of movies, and so I would give him the benefit of the doubt. Like I said, though, it wasn't one of his worst performances by no means, but it wasn't one of his best either. So I'm going to go somewhere between a 6.5 in terms of that. Like I said, others with Rotten Tomato only gave it a 17. But again, that was based only on 11 reviews. I stick by my earlier comments regarding the USS Indianapolis, in the sense that the USS Indianapolis is one of those historical events that's out there, but a lot of people just don't know the story. If it wasn't for the movie Jaws in 1975, I think even fewer people would understand or have any historical reference regarding the USS Indianapolis in terms of that. We see that on February the 5th, 2015, Nicolas Cage was set to play the lead role of Captain McVeigh in the film. We see that Matt Lanter was set on April the 1st, 2015 to play U.S. Navy diver Chief Petty Officer Brian Bam Smithwick. Lanter revealed to the producers after his audition that his grandfather, Kinley Lantern, was a signalman on the Indianapolis. Furthermore, Lantern's father, Joe Lantern, is a chairman of the Second Watch, an organization of survivors and their families. Joe Lantern and his co-chair, Mario Bullard, stayed in contact with the producers during pre-production and were welcomed to the set during the photography. Then on May the 13th, 2015, it was revealed that Tom Sizemore, Thomas Jane, and Brian Presley would also join the cast for the film in terms of that. On July the 15th, 2015, Cody Walker was cast in the film to play one of the crewmen aboard the ship. And like I said, that was his acting debut in terms of that. See here, principal photography on the film began on June the 19th, 2015 in Mobile, Alabama, with many of the scenes shot aboard the battleship USS Alabama, which I discussed earlier, that was to take place or be to be in place of the Indianapolis. Filming also took place in San Francisco and over in Japan, but the producers later opted to double Mobile for both San Francisco and Japan in terms of that. And then on June the 27th, 2015, filming was underway in Orange Beach in terms of that for the film. After filming on July the 14th in downtown Mobile, Nicolas Cage met a real Navy veteran named Richard Stevens on a beach at Peneville Square. Stevens was one of the survivors of the ship USS Indianapolis. So Cage and Stevens had a long talk about the disaster, and I'm sure got a much deeper appreciation for the story and the events that those brave individuals went through. Again, what a terrible tragedy in history, and I just can't imagine what it would have been like floating in the ocean for 5 days with no food, with no water, no protection from the sun. Oh, and by the way, I'm surrounded by sharks that want to eat me because of everybody's injuries and the blood, et cetera, in terms of that. So, overall, like I said, Personally, I'm going to give this film a 6 out of a 10. One, just because I'm a little partial to history, but at the same time, I think it's a great story to tell. One thing I'm not too keen on is, but I understand why people do it. I understand why Hollywood does it, is to kind of bring the love story in the mix. I get it. It sells tickets. It's something that they want, they need. I get that. And so, it is what it is in terms of that. Okay? Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode of The Complete Works. We were discussing the film The USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, starring Nicolas Cage, that was released in 2016. You can find out more of my work on film-book.com. You can search my name, Doug Hess, or you can search The Complete Works. You can find me on Twitter at HessDoug14. And we thank you for listening. We encourage you, if you like what you've heard, to subscribe so we can have the podcast sent to you directly. And again, if you have any comments, you feel free to email us at podcast@film-book.com. Again, that's podcast@film-book.com. In the subject line, you can put in The Complete Works. You can put in the USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, or any of the other films that we're talking about. Again, we strongly encourage you to hit the subscription button. And until next week on The Complete Works, have a great week, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. That the audience was more willing to give the praise to the actor or actresses in the movie, but was a little standoffish when it came to the actual film. In terms of that, the audience polled by Cinema Score gave the film an average grade of A, on an A+ to an F. However, Stone works best when it's just Edward and the three journalists in the hotel room sweating it out, because they were deciding what they were going to release, when they were going to release it, etc. in terms of that. But for the actual material of the film, I think a lot of people, like I said, were just a little standoffish or a little squeamish. Now, let's fast forward to 2019, and with the current political climate that is out there, I'm not so sure that this film wouldn't get a much stronger praise from some of the critics when you're looking at the actual material, not the acting, but the message that's there. I think you'd probably have things a little bit different today in 2019 versus 2016, but I could be wrong on that. And again, like I said, I don't want to make this about politics. This is not the podcast for that. And if you're looking for that, there's other podcasts for you to join. I just want to stay with the entertainment value when it comes to with movies and Nicolas Cage, or The Complete Works in general, of whoever that we're talking about, an actor, actress, director, composer, etc. And let you, the audience, come up with your own thoughts and take on that. Okay? Well, that wraps up another edition of The Complete Works. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes or another podcast service, please, we encourage you to rate and review this episode. If you're listening to this podcast on the YouTube channel, FilmBook Podcast, please like us, our video, and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. And we just ask that you tune in next time when we review and analyze the next Nicolas Cage film. We want to thank you for listening. And again, if you like what you hear, please hit subscribe so we can have future editions of the podcast, The Complete Work, sent directly to you. Love to hear from you as well. Send us an email if you have any thoughts, comments, or concerns. And you can do that at podcast@film-book.com. And in the subject line, put in the complete works, Snowden, or any of the other other movies that we have been reviewing. And we hope to see you next time. So again, thanks for listening to the complete works. This has been an episode on Nicolas Cage, and the movie that we reviewed for Nicolas Cage was Snowden. So until next time, take care.